Good morning to you all. Thank you for being here and even standing up. Today, January 27th, is a very important date. 60 years ago, at Auschwitz-Birkenau, we discovered the extent of evil done by man. 30 days ago, a tsunami hit Asia, and ever since, we have witnessed the extraordinary response that the world global community has been able to foster. And it has made us all aware that there are silent tsunamis hitting one continent day after day, and that is Africa. And here in Davos, which has so often been caricatured as the temple of capitalist narcissism, it is interesting to note that year after year, those issues, social issues, health, poverty, environment, have made their way to the top of our agenda. And of course, it was very striking yesterday that the City Hall meeting, the Town Hall meeting, came up with poverty as indeed the top priority on the agenda. Of course, we've heard many speeches about poverty, thousands of those. We've heard many promises from the rich countries, and nothing much has happened year after year, at least not enough, and certainly not for Africa. Today, we have an extraordinary opportunity to have with us some of those men who are able to do something and to change the world and to change things for Africans. President Obasanjo of Nigeria, Bono, the rock star, very early in the morning for you. Thank you for being here. Tony Blair, Prime Minister of Great Britain and President of the G8, and soon to be also President of the European Union, and also in an electoral year, but so you don't look it. President Mbeki of South Africa, Bill Gates, Chairman of Microsoft and co-founder of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and President Clinton, whom I don't need to introduce to you. All the participants, and I thank them for that, have agreed to have a discussion and an exchange rather than a series of formal statements. So I would like to start with you, Prime Minister. Yesterday you gave us a very energetic, optimistic speech in your usual vein about what could be done, because you think there is a consensus agenda and you want the G8 to engage into action. But we all remember that Africa has been on the G8 agenda for the last 2 years. So what do you think might be the obstacles to the kind of efficiency which obviously you want to implement this time?
Christine, first of all, before I answer the question, can I give my apologies in advance? I have to leave after 30 or 40 minutes to go back to the Holocaust Memorial Service in Britain, so forgive me for that. I think that, Africa's actually been on the agenda. We first put it on the G8 agenda in 1998 in our presidency in Birmingham. It's stayed on the agenda ever since. I think it wouldn't be true to say nothing had ever happened as a result. The debt relief package in the most highly indebted countries was an element that came out of the G8. Thabo Mbeki, myself, and President Obasanjo worked very hard on the new partnership for development in Africa, and that's important too. But I think we're all aware this is the year when we need a big push forward. And the purpose of the Africa Commission and the plan that we want to put forward is to get a comprehensive and systematic analysis of what is wrong and prescriptions to put it right and a mechanism to carry it through.
And what would be your priorities for action? What would be what Jeffrey Sachs called, the quick-to-win actions?
Aid, where we've said already that we believe that we need at least to double the aid. Debt relief, trade, conflict resolution, governance, dealing with the main killer diseases. I think those are those are the issues that really come out of it. And as I say, I mean, it's not that you're going to be inventing entirely new things on each one of those areas, but to bring it together in a comprehensive plan and then have a mechanism for following it through, that's going to be our aim.
You need a lot of money for that. We've seen after the tsunami that indeed that money can be generated, at least from individuals, not always from governments. Now, President Chirac, to this very audience, suggested 4 new ways to levy some taxes on financial flows. And without being rude to our Swiss hosts, he even suggested that capital flows in and out of those countries very keen on banking secrecy be taxed. How do you react to that, Prime Minister?
With interest, because I think, you know, everyone will put forward proposals on the table. We put forward the International Finance Facility. I think the key thing is there will be many different ways people can get to the end objective. The absolutely key thing is to agree that the end objective is a very substantial uplift in aid. And so, you know, we can debate what are the right mechanisms, and we've got to see which get the maximum buy-in. But there may be different ways that different countries, you know, reach this situation. I mean, Britain in its own budget will have trebled our aid budget to Africa. So there's a certain amount we are doing on a bilateral level as well. But the International Finance Facility is one way we think, an imaginative way of trying to get more money. President Chirac has put these proposals forward. We have to analyze them and look at them and see what support we can get. But the most important thing is to end up with a practical, workable plan for the uplift in aid. That's the objective.
President Mbeki, you run Africa's richest and best organized economy. How do you see... It's true, it's a fact. I haven't said there aren't many problems in South Africa. What, in your view, should be the priorities on the ground, assuming that indeed the G8 comes out with the agenda, with the money, and that there is that impetus in 2005? What concrete priorities?
Well, the priorities we've set ourselves as the African continent, and President Obasanjo there is my current chair, so he'll correct me if I'm making a mistake. The priorities we've set ourselves as Africans is to say, obviously, we have to address the matter of peace and stability on the continent very vigorously, very successfully, make sure that we end all of these conflicts, because without that, we don't have the development. And I think the continent is indeed very focused on this particular matter. Secondly, we've said that it's critically important that all of these issues about democracy, about good governance and so on, need to be addressed again with similar vigor. And indeed, we then set up this peer review mechanism so that we have a mechanism and institution systematically to address this particular issue on the continent. Critically important. We've also said that because we now have, in the context of NEPAD, an Africa-wide vision of what we need to do with regard to these matters that Tony is talking about, that we must make sure that the institutions exist on the continent actually to promote that program, and in particular, the regional economic units. It's much more manageable than all of the continent. So to strengthen those institutions to make sure that they are able to work. And then, of course, the generation of the resources within the continent. We are, for instance, looking now at what we might generate from the African pension funds. Right. You've actually got some significant pension funds on the continent which never tapped into for this institutional money, so that we ourselves don't only ask the G8, but generate these resources within our continent. So we need to move in those sorts of directions, and of course, critically make sure that this partnership with the G8 actually works.
As you know, in this audience, there are some extremely rich people, or at least people who lead very powerful organizations, companies. How do you want the business community to be better involved in aid and development?
Well, I must say that the Africa Commission, in its work, has done some important work in terms of those linkages with the private sector, both in Africa and elsewhere in the world. In the NAPAD process also, we're doing the same thing, particularly with regard to the private sector on the continent. I think one of the big challenges that we face with regard to the NAPAD program, it will be the same as with the G8 Africa Action Plan, is the elaboration of what are called bankable projects. Because indeed, in the end, we must come back to these business people to say, here is a bankable project. And it's thrown up a particular challenge in terms of capacity for project preparation. Unfortunately, that matter is being addressed also. So I think that the expanding links between the Africa Commission and the business world, in Africa and the world, the same with the NAPAD process, I think lays a very good basis for us to get to this stage where we can say, here are investment opportunities in whatever area.
President Clinton, when you left office, you established a foundation in your name, which has been very active on the HIV/AIDS front, convincing the big companies, pharmaceutical companies, to lower the price of antivirus medication. As we know, I think there are about 300,000 people under treatment today in Africa, and 30 million need treatment, which gives an idea of the discrepancy. To us Europeans, it remains a mystery that the most powerful economy in the world, the American one, doesn't give more to aid, whereas at least 5 European countries do more than the minimum which the G7 and the G8 have repeatedly asked for. I think the US give about, what, 0.1% of the GDP? How come?
I think that, I want to say what I think we should do about it, but I think the real answer is nobody will ever get beat for Congress or president for not doing it. I mean, Senator Frist is here, the Senate Majority Leader. He's gone around the world as a physician trying to help people personally. President Bush has pushed through this Millennium Challenge grant, which is basically kind of modeled on what we did with the Millennium Debt Relief Initiative, saying, you know, we want standards, we want targeted aid here. And the Congress has authorized a substantial increase in funds for AIDS, which I think will be begin to be distributed this year. But I think you have to understand that if you poll the American people and you ask them the right question, 70-something% of them will support everything you think we should be doing. But they're under this colossal misapprehension that we give 8 to 10% of our income in foreign aid, our budget, when in fact we give like 1% of the budget in foreign aid or less, except in emergencies where we do our fair share and then some. So if I might, we've never created an effective political constituency, but it is coming. And I'd like to just suggest, if I might, a couple of things. First of all, we have leaders that get this now. We've got, I mentioned Senator Frist. Hillary's got a bill in the Senate on trying to do more on international aid for education to get all the world's children in school. There are lots of people who are doing things on this. And the President came out with this Millennium Challenge grant, which I think there'll be disbursements from this year. Second thing is, my neighbor here, Mr. Gates, has changed the whole mindset in America about what private citizens can do. And Bono has as well. And third thing I want to say is we have raised in America for tsunami relief, former President Bush and I are working on this, as you probably know, a staggering amount of money. I'm almost worried that we're going to hurt other charitable efforts. But the interesting thing is more than half the money came in off the internet. Right. So you're seeing the democratization, if you will, of international assistance through the internet in the same way we saw the democratization of campaign finance contributions in this last election. So one of the things I'm trying to figure out how to do, besides taking our own AIDS efforts to scale, we'll be treating 100,000 people by the end of this quarter, and I think we'll have 2 million people getting treated off our drug contract within a year and 3 months, I hope, of the more or less 6 million people that desperately need AIDS. But one of the things we're trying to figure out how to do is how to take this tsunami relief effort and turn it into an annual effort to meet the Millennium Development Goals in Africa and elsewhere. For example, we're targeting I'm targeting my personal efforts to water and sanitation because it's consistent with what I'm doing with AIDS. 1 in 4 people every year die of AIDS, TB, malaria, and infections related to diarrhea. Most of them are little kids. That's the biggest danger now in the tsunami areas for the next 3 months. What I hope is that we can come out of this with a public-private model for how we can generate enormous popular support for meeting the Millennium Development Goals when there isn't a tsunami disaster. But there's a disaster, as you pointed out, every single day in Africa and elsewhere throughout the world. So that's my take on it. We are in the process of democratizing this issue, and as we do it, there will be a political constituency in America which will make it a voting issue. But you need to understand, the Americans aren't bad on this. The public is overwhelmingly in favor of our doing at least our fair share. But it's never a voting issue. No politician in either party believes that he or she will be defeated if they don't do it. And so that's...
If I may interrupt, do you regret that you didn't build that constituency when you were in office and that you didn't ask the question at the time?
You could. We tripled overseas efforts for AIDS. We did the Millennium Debt Relief. We did whatever we could, but the Congress was affirmatively hostile to all this when I was in office.
Right.
They are less hostile. The Millennium Debt Relief thing began to move the two parties together in 2000. And then when President Bush endorsed the Millennium Challenge Grant and asked for more money for AIDS, it began to change the position of the Republican Party. So we're all moving now. It's been way too slow, but I think there's an opportunity for a real breakthrough here in the next year.
As indeed we have Senator Frist here in the audience, I can't resist, if President Obasanjo allows me to do so, to ask you, Senator, we know you're the majority leader in the Senate, is the Bush administration going to engage more into the aid issue? And correct me if I'm wrong or rude, but I believe not 1 cent has yet been seen of that millennium engagement that was announced some time ago.
I think you have seen real leadership over the last several years, building on the previous administration. As you look at the issues that have been touched upon today, whether it's the public health issues of global HIV/AIDS, with a $15 billion initiative that has far outsurpassed the individual initiatives of any other country. If you look at the Global HIV Fund, the United States of America, with the support of the American Congress, has put forth about $1 out of every $3 that is available today. If you look at, President Clinton mentioned the tsunami region, where I and many others had the opportunity to be several weeks ago. And if you looked at the aid that was most quickly on the ground in terms of disaster relief, it was the United States of America. Indeed, it's the United States of America that provides 40% of all disaster relief for the entire world. If you look in other regions, or actually throughout Africa, or the Sudan, or really throughout Africa, where famine strikes so constantly, or the Darfur region, or over in Chad, where I've had the opportunity to travel as Majority Leader of the United States Senate, it is the United States of America that provides 60% of all food relief, world food relief in the world today, last year. And therefore, I think people can be critical. There is more that we can do. The fact that you do have the leader of the Senate here working with the former president in this regard, I think, makes a great statement. I should also add that we're the world's single largest source of development assistance, providing 20% of all ODA from the OEDC Development Assistance Committee countries. I say all that simply to say that we are, I believe, moving in the right direction. I will just, one last thing is that I hope to hear from the panel, because I've worked with many of them on this. There are 1.1 billion people today who don't have access to clean water. Africa, the continent of Africa, is an epicenter for that. Right now, 10,000 kids die every day. I hope that becomes a major initiative for all of us on the African continent.
Thank you, Senator. President Obasanjo, not only do you run Nigeria, but you're the president in charge of the African Union. Walter, let's bounce on what the senator just said. In your view, on the ground, in your own country, in sub-Saharan Africa, is that one of the top concrete issues which should be tackled, assuming all that money will indeed pour at long last into Africa?
Thank you. I want to, first of all, agree with President Thabo Mbeki that the priority for us in Africa, which we have identified and which we are committed to, is the issue, first of all, issue of peace and security. Because unless you have peace and security, you cannot really have the ability to do any other thing. And then, of course, we know that to have peace and security, because you have to be able to deal with perceived and real injustices and unfairness, which can only be dealt with through good governance. But I also want to take this opportunity to thank those who have given aid to Africa, those who are giving. I must say that tsunami had done one thing to me. I thought that the milk of kindness had been sapped from the humanity, because we have heard of aid fatigue and all sorts of things. But the way the world and the individual, the private people, the ordinary people came round and felt concerned and felt committed to assist the victims of tsunami, I must say gives me courage, gives me hope, and make me feel that really we can still make it. The point is that what the senator said is true. We are getting some aids, but what are we getting it for? We are getting it for Darfur. We are getting it for when we have flood. We are getting it when we have such disasters. We are not getting enough critical mass of funds to make development possible. And that is the point we are making. We need the critical mass of resources to make a change, to make a difference. Now, let me give...
Sorry, if I may just ask you one question on that. The critical mass of funds, would you approve of the French proposal, indeed, that there are taxes on financial flows in whatever form? Well, does that seem to you, from the rich countries, as something really meaningful?
Well, any tax that can be generated and that can be seen to be utilized very well.
That's a very important
and that
condition.
Is very important. That is being utilized very well by the countries who will be the beneficiaries, because that is also important. If people are being taxed, they must be able to say that the taxation is being well utilized. It's achieving the purpose.
And precisely, Mr. President, it was very striking to us all yesterday that in the town hall priorities, we all insisted on the need from countries in need of help, that indeed there is more transparency, and that, I quote one of the participants, also, key ingredient must be the willingness to help themselves. In other words, you know, the beginning of the solution is within your countrymen first.
I agree entirely with you. We have done three things in Africa to show in recent times that we really want to help ourselves, and we are helping ourselves. One, we have transformed, or if you like, we have replaced OAU with AU. It's a new organization, an organization that is vastly different from OAU, an organization that takes economic and social issues more seriously than the way that OAU had ever taken it. Now, aside or complementary to that is the issue of NEPAD. It's a program of AU organized, established, conceived by African leaders for Africans to actually deal with our problems or our social economic problems. And we had in NEPAD something that has never been, I don't know whether any other organization, international organization has that, what we call, and President Thabo Mbeki referred to it, what we call African peer review mechanism. Now, it's something that we have been doing informally. When President Thabo Mbeki and I meet, I will ask, how are things in South Africa? How is this? How is that? He will ask me about Nigeria. What is Labour people doing? Are they on strike again? And all that. Now, what we have now done in the peer review mechanism is we have now formalized it. We
so
now
you save
open
time when you meet. Now,
when we meet, we still do the informal one. But now we have a formal one that we send out panels to actually peer review our own system, political, economic, social, and then report to us. And we can tell ourselves the home truth. You are not doing well enough. Now, and we have that. AU, I talk about, has now instituted or established something that we've never had before, Peace and Security Council of AU, where we can now say, yes, move on, and we can even send troops, like we have done, by AU to Darfur. These are new things that we are doing for ourselves.
Thank you.
And that shows that we are. But let me come to the point you made about water, because it's important. Now, that was the question you asked about water.
I did ask that.
You did ask water. I talk about peace and security. You cannot really talk about security in the military terms or in the absence of violence or conflict terms without talking about security in terms of food, in terms of employment, in terms of education. So, in terms of health, when you talk of security, now you have to take it beyond the absence of violence, absence of conflict, into these other areas. And your idea of complete security, and surely my idea of security, must go beyond violence in Darfur, violence
primary resources
yes.
first.
We must take food, water, employment, health, education. They must form package of security.
And on insisting on women, who usually take the worst plight and maybe the best movers in any society. Bill Gates.
Women and children.
Not only, as President Clinton put it, have you changed American and I think Western mentality as to what very wealthy private citizens can do, but your foundation has really made a significant difference as far as health issues are concerned, and particularly HIV/AIDS. Nevertheless, as you know, private donors and business people, companies, are extremely worried about corruption in all the countries where massive aid is going. So how do you see to it that what you put into your efforts doesn't get diverted?
You're absolutely right that the image of aid is a very bad one today. And what we need to do is take the examples where things are working and really get that story out. Prove that the money can be very well spent and show the impact that it has, that as we save lives, actually population growth goes down, that therefore the ability to educate kids and have more resources, that it makes a huge difference. And so things like the Global Alliance for Vaccines Initiative, Gavi, it is saving lives. It basically, for every $1,000 that's given, it can save a life. And so as we get billions in there, we're talking about saving millions and millions of lives. It's ironic that at the time where science is advancing, we have this great resource of medical understanding, we've allowed the AIDS epidemic to really be out of control, particularly in Africa, but more and more so even in Asia as well. And we've allowed malaria to come back. Malaria, because of drug resistance, is now killing more children and more pregnant mothers than it ever has. And yet a small application of the research funds for medical work to these problems will come up with what I think, fairly call miracle solutions. And so I think as we get smart philanthropists to come in and be able to testify that, boy, these things are working, we're bringing the same sense of efficiency and demand for results to what's going on in philanthropy that we brought, say, to the business side of activity, that starts to draw people in. And so we're seeing that with Vaccine Fund. We're seeing that with Global Fund. Hopefully, the thing that's held all of this back is not that people don't care, it's that it hasn't had the visibility. And the success stories can be a source of that visibility. So I'd say on the health front, which really can cause this incredible breakthrough, I'd say that I'm very optimistic about the years ahead.
And to all the business people here in this room, what would be the first piece of advice you would give them if, as we all hope, they want to engage their companies into more, practical action?
Well, I think that there's two sides. One is that every business person who's been in a rich country and able to accumulate some wealth, I hope that they'll look at giving it to these causes. Personal philanthropy can be a major factor here because it funds new ideas and approaches that typically government wouldn't fund. It's got to be a combination. The scale of the problem requires government funds and individual funds. Also, each business can look at the opportunity in Africa in terms of going into the schools there and the businesses there, making sure that the connectivity gets built. There's a lot of economic opportunity that can flow from this. And if businesses take a long-term view of the partnerships there, that they can play a role of helping drive that economic development. So, time spent in Africa will definitely make one want, both on the business side and the giving side, to be more involved.
Bono, not only can you sing, but well, that's not what I'm asking you to do right now. Good. But you represent civil society at its best because you keep banging at those doors of all these powerful people, some of whom are with us this morning. How do you react to what has been said? Do you think that in the language some progress has been done, that indeed action may come about? Are you as optimistic as the Prime Minister?
Yeah, the tone of the debate sometimes worries me. Just the actual tone, the kind of reasonable men talking about very unreasonable situations. I'd like the tone of the debate to change.
Go ahead.
And because, I'm walking down the streets, it's beautiful. Davos, it looks gorgeous, snow, top mountains, and people saying, well done, really good, love what you're doing, love your cause, Bono. And I don't think 6,000 Africans dying every day of a preventable, treatable disease like AIDS is a cause. I think it's an emergency. And I don't think 3,000, thank you. I don't think 3,000 Africans dying from a mosquito bite is a cause. I think it's an emergency.
And Jeffrey Sachs pointed out that a mosquito tent costs $5.
Jeffrey Sachs has a proposal that will cost $1 billion that can save 1 million lives, and I think he deserves some applause for that right there now. It's just the tone of the debate. You see, you've seen what happened with the tsunami in Southeast Asia. You've seen what happens when you have leadership from President Clinton and from President Bush. The world will pay attention. The world actually wants to be involved in something bigger than itself.
So what should be done, in your view? Let's imagine you're president of Great Britain, which, God forbid, will not happen.
The Irish have been working on that for years.
Okay.
I wouldn't...
Okay.
I wouldn't move to a smaller house. I think we have to dramatize this better. And, you know, before I say that, I want to say I'm humbled, and I think we should be humbled, that we're sitting here with two titans of this debate, with President Obasanjo and President Mbeki, that they welcome us and let us take part in this kind of discussion about their magnificent continent. I think we should be humbled. And a friend, you know, someone who lets you help. You know, it's important to remember maybe that Europe had its moments of sort of crescendoed calamity. You know, and not just the bubonic plague and the Black Death, which took out 1/3 of Europe in the Middle Ages, but as recently as this century, the scourge of fascism, scourge of communism. Where would we have been without help? You know, where would Europe have been without a Marshall Plan? So if you're asking me, yes, but you know, it's a cliche in a sense, the Marshall Plan, but what it's talking about is something comprehensive, programmatic across the different problems. We finish out debt cancellation, something that both President Clinton and Prime Minister Blair should be very, very proud of. Because, you know, you wonder what comes out of these G8 meetings, you know, these high-level talking shops. Well, actually, something did there, and the bilateral debts of about 25 countries on average were cancelled. And I have seen, traveling with actually Senator Frist, I have seen in Uganda 3 times the amount of children going to school in Uganda as a result of debt cancellation. So finish that out with the monies that are owed to the institutions like the World Bank and the fund.
And what about taxes? What about fiscal
I don't care
levies?
where they figure out how to get the money, what sleight of hand is necessary, I don't care. All I know is that if we describe this if we improve on our dramatizing of this, people are prepared. They really are. People want to be part of something bigger than themselves. As I say, what else are we going to be remembered for, our generation? We will be remembered for the internet. We're remembered for 3 things right now. The internet, the war against terror, and what we did or didn't do about this glorious continent of Africa and its travails. And I think we can be the generation that ends extreme poverty. I really do, and I think I will spend the rest of my life pledged to that commitment. Stupid poverty is what I'm talking about.
Prime Minister, may I remind you that you have to leave to go to the Holocaust Memorial in London. I think it's time for you, and we very much regret it, but we thank you for having been with us.
He's not ready to leave yet. Let him stay.
I'm afraid I got it.
Thank you. Yes. Bono, I'm sorry, you haven't really answered my question about concrete priorities. Let's assume you're in charge, okay? You have to deal with public opinion, as President Clinton pointed out. All our politicians want to be re-elected, or else, you know, there's something wrong with them. What would be your 3 priorities, concrete actions?
concrete actions. Finish out what was started with debt cancellation. The money's owed to the financial institutions, the IMF, the World Bank. There's still a country like Tanzania,
right,
even after its bilateral debts have been cancelled, paying back more to those institutions than it is on its on health and education combined in its own country. So finish that out. Secondly, increases in aid. We need that. If that has to be conditionalized to countries that are tackling corruption and that are doing the right thing by their people, fair enough, but we have to have increase in aid flows. And the third thing, trade. We have to deal with the trade.
Which is something that Prime Minister Blair hinted at yesterday.
Yeah, and it's painful in Europe. You know, the common agricultural policy, no one wants to go there. But we have to go there because, you know, it's all very well putting our hand in our pockets and being charitable. But actually what Africa wants is trade, not aid. And Africa, you know, this man manages, or, you know, an enormous economy. And he manages it very, very well. But there are other countries that I think want to move into a realm of commerce rather than of benevolent supplication.
And it's been, of course, of the agenda of the Doha rounds at WTO, and it's supposed to be prominent again on the next meeting. President Mbeki, in your view, both President Obasanjo and yourself stressed the necessity first to deal with conflicts and to put an end to all these eruptions which cost, like in the Congo, so terrible toll. If, let's assume you have indeed the financial aid that you were talking about earlier, how, in your view, should the world community organize that aid? Should it go through the current institutions, or should these institutions need a kind of a lift? Should they change their procedures, the way they act? Are they fast enough? Because that's also something that Professor Sachs hinted at in his Millennium report.
I think it might be more useful to start at the point where Bono left.
Go ahead.
Which is indeed a point that Tony Blair mentioned. The debt cancellation must be effective. And it requires the passion and the rage. And I mean the understanding that it really is quite obscene that poor countries become net capital exporters to rich countries because of debt. So this thing has to be dealt with. So hopefully at the next G8 summit, unfortunately Tony is gone, hopefully at the next G8 summit this year in the United Kingdom, finally we'll take some decision on this thing. Critically important. Second matter that you've been raising about proposals that Jacques Chirac has been making about additional taxes. Addresses...
Would you approve of those?
No, hang on. Addresses the critical matter of, apart from the debt cancellation, generating the necessary capital flows into the continent. A number of proposals on the agenda. The British have been putting forward the idea of an international financing facility. The matter of extra taxes was raised jointly by President Chirac, President Lula of Brazil, and so on, some others. And what we had agreed at the last G8 summit in the United States was that by the time we get to the next G8 meeting in July, we should have consolidated all of these ideas and come with one idea instead of these competing ideas. And indeed, if it is possible to generate some of those resources through whatever forms of taxation, that's fine. But I'm saying critically, before we say where shall the money go, who shall handle it, we should answer the question, where is the money? Really hoping that, you see, the initiative taken by Prime Minister Blair with regard to the Africa Commission, we hope is going to address the practical matters, not the philosophical matters. How do we actually end up with debt cancellation? How do we actually generate these larger resources that are needed? How do we ensure the matter that you are raising, that they are managed properly at the global level in a manner such that they are effectively used, all of these things. I think those are the first critical matters to be addressed.
Bono also hinted at the trade issues.
Correct.
Is that also, in your view, on top of the agenda and should be?
It should be. It should be. You see, again, we are hoping that, as I just said now, that the Africa Commission will actually help us to answer these questions practically. Because all of these questions, again, as Tony was saying, there's really basically no new agenda. The issues have been identified, the priorities, what is it that needs to be done. The challenge has been actually to do. So the trade issues, indeed, that's also been on the common agenda between ourselves and the G8. And so let's do these detailed things which would impact on what the WTO does, so that indeed we address this trade question which Bono was quite correctly raised.
President Clinton, the issue of the institutions which currently are regulating aid, both in financial terms and also on the ground, especially in Africa. There was even a rumor that at one point that you might consider running one of them. Would you say that these institutions, which after all were set up at a time where the gap between the rich and the poor was not as wide as it is today, that these institutions would need some sort of a lift?
Well, I think both the World Bank and the IMF have tried to modernize themselves over time, and the whole enterprise of aid has been in a process of reinvention. I mean, the Millennium Debt Relief was a real watershed development, because it said we're going to give this money, but it has to be used for education, health care, or economic growth. And Bono mentioned Uganda. I could give you lots of other examples. My own view is that we should keep working on improving them, but we really need to do what President Obasanjo said, which is to have a comprehensive strategy. You need to have an aid strategy, a trade strategy, a debt relief strategy. The problem with the Millennium Debt Relief, there were operational problems, but basically, eventually, I think about 25 of the countries, of the 32 countries that qualified by income, got real benefits out of it. But there are lots of countries that look like they're too rich to be in that group that have massive structural and poverty problems. President Mbeki, look at all the problems he's had because of South Africa's relative affluence. That all these people pouring over his northern border. President Obasanjo found all kinds of structural problems when he became president of Nigeria that he had nothing to do with. So I think there needs to be another round of debt relief. I think we need to look at this trade issue. I would caution you not to overemphasize agriculture. A lot of the poorest countries in the world are food importers. And we got to be careful how we do this. We don't want to run the price of food up to those countries. We got to be careful about that. But I'd like to make, if I could, just 3 points real quick. Number one, this is cheap. I don't blame you for asking this dedicated tax, financial currency. It's great stuff and makes good press. But let's get real here. The president just asked for $80 billion for the Iraq war for a year. For a pittance of that, we could double America's international assistance in all these areas. This is cheap. First, it's cheap. Second thing is, anybody who says we shouldn't do this because there's corruption or incompetence ought to be put into a closet and not listened to again. We have example after example after example of it working. Your new colleague in Kenya dropped the school fees and 1 million kids showed up in a month. I mean, this is ridiculous. If you're worried about that, why don't we fund, this is what I said last time I talked here, why don't we set aside some small portion of our aid and fund system building in countries? You know, when you join the military in America, they don't just give you a gun and let you go shoot somebody. They train leaders. They build systems. They spend an enormous amount of time, and that's one of the reasons it works so well. We don't do that. We say, oh, we're going to do aid or we're going to do education or health care or development. We don't give these countries any time, money, and expertise to speak of to develop the capacity to run this stuff. That's ridiculous. And the final thing I'd like to say in response to something Bill does, and we've got others in the audience as well. We ought to be focused on what it takes to get to scale, to make a difference. There are 40-something million people with HIV, 6 million are virtually at death's door, about 300,000 are getting medicine, 130,000 of them are in Brazil, where the government does it. Everybody else is whining around still, after all this time, about whether this generic medicine's any good, even though the WHO has certified it, and we've got it down to $140 a person a year, and the testing down to $80 a person a year, going down to $40 this year. And so our little foundation is going to be treating 100,000 people, working with the governments, a lot of governments in this room. And 30 other countries have been approved to buy this medicine, which we think will serve by about a year and 3 months, 4 months from now, we hope will be up to 2 million people. What happens to the other 4? It is peanuts. And we're still having this. I noticed last weekend, one American op-ed piece, some guy dumped all over me again for promoting generic medicine for people with AIDS. And you know, he was going to hold out and make sure they got good medicine after another 4 or 5 million people die. I mean, if you want to talk about Bono changing the tone here, this is cheap. The corruption and incompetence issue is bogus. We ought to fund doing more about it. And we ought to start with AIDS, with infrastructure, and with getting the medicine. And you know, once a country has the infrastructure, you can save the lives. You want to go save 4 million lives? Give them the medicine. It's not rocket science. And it's so cheap compared to everything else all these rich countries do, not just us. So why should we have an argument that will make interesting news articles? Should we have a special tax and a cross-border currency exchange and go after the Swiss and non-reporting? It's cheap. This is cheap. You know, and so let's don't get diverted here. Let's spend the money.
And to get the money, should we still raise to 0.47% of GDP the contribution which every rich country should make, President?
Do I what?
No, should we still raise the amount of GDP?
Absolutely. But, and I think, to go back to something Senator Frist says, I think we ought to get every country's own assessment of where it is in that, and we should use it, because at least in my country now, there's a sea change between where the attitude of the Congress and the country is now and 5, 6 years ago. Do you agree with that? A sea change. And partly because people know the debt relief thing worked, because they know because there's a great movement in the conservative Christian community in America to do something about AIDS. There's all kinds of stuff going on that's changed. But what I'm saying is we should all hold ourselves accountable every year. We should recognize that the Scandinavian countries and a few others have done the only ones that have actually met the Millennium Goals. But we also ought to have a good, clear, honest accounting, and we ought to recognize that aid alone is not enough. The Africa Growth and Opportunity Act that the United States did, the trade deal we did with Jordan, which is now, then we just did another one with Egypt. There are a lot of things that also need to be done. And I'm saying, let me just say this. I know a lot of people didn't like what I said the first time about the American people are for aid, but they don't beat politicians that don't support it. I'll say something else that's kind of improper. I think we ought to do a lot more with debt relief, because if you're in the Congress, if Bill Frist has got to put together a budget, right? If you get debt relief and you're running any country, what you get is the relief from making the debt service payments, right? And it's worth just as much as aid to you, okay? But if Bill Frist is putting together a budget and he has to figure out how to do it, almost all foreign debt to developing countries has been already discounted. So let's say we've loaned $1 billion to somebody. There's some government employee who tells you what we really think the debt's worth. And they say, oh, there's only a 50% chance they'll repay it. That means for $500 million, we can give $1 billion worth of debt relief. It's easier for him to pass. Every country, all these rich countries have similar systems. And we found that in the Africa debt relief, it's an embarrassing thing to say, but if you have to actually make these decisions and other people are pleading for the money, it really matters. So I think there should be a serious effort at another big round of debt relief that goes way above the income level that we stopped at with the Millennium Debt Relief Challenge.
President Obasanjo, just one quick answer before we give the chance for our audience to ask you some questions. President Clinton insisted on structural help. In other words, there's the money, the priorities, but also there is need to help your people and people in sub-Saharan Africa to use that money to the best. How could that be done, you know, in a short-term period, in an efficient way?
If the money is available, I believe that even right now, we have certain structures in place, certain institutions in place that can be used. In Africa, we have ADB, which is already a trusted and well-run institution that is looking into NEPAD program for us. We have World Bank. We have WHO, which is a world organization to deal with the issue of health, and it's been doing so, and can be trusted to do so if there are resources to put into doing more. We have the Food and Agriculture Organization. We have the UNESCO. I don't really think that what we lack right now is the institutions out there. Maybe internally, we need to strengthen institutions, build capacities, and retain capacities. If I talk about Nigeria for once, we have over 5,000 trained medical doctors practicing in America. Most of them were initially trained in Nigeria. The scarce Nigerian resources were used to train them. Because we could not retain the capacity, they went to America. Now, we want to get them back. It's nice for them to be citizens of the world, but citizens of the world that erodes Nigeria's capacity after that capacity has been trained is also detrimental to the development of Nigeria. Now, I believe, I want to join Bono, that the situation in Africa must be seen as an emergency. And until Africa's situation is seen as emergency, is presented as such, and is seen worldwide, then we will not even be able to raise the critical mass of funds that I have talked about. I believe that the money can be raised. And I believe that if the money is raised, it can be wisely utilized, prudently utilized. Now, let me say good things that are happening in Africa. We are talking about peace and security. Almost single-handedly on our own, we try to work with Liberia. The UN joined us, that we spearheaded the bringing about peace in Liberia. We did it in Sierra Leone. We are doing it now in Darfur. We are going to do it in Democratic Republic of Congo. These are good things that are coming out of Africa. They must be recognized. We are working hard with the international community to get polio out of Africa, to get malaria out of Africa, and we can do it. We just need that little bit of assistance. In the same way that spearheaded the issue of HIV/AIDS, President Clinton came and took the front line. And that is how the Global Trust Fund for for HIV/AIDS developed. We are And when we talk about even countries like Nigeria, we are making some progress in agriculture for the first time since independence. In 2003 and 2004, we increased our agricultural production by 7%. 7%. We increased our admission to primary education by more than 30% in the space of 2 years. We are making progress. But what we normally hear is that, oh yes, Nigeria is an oil-producing country. When everything is taken, what comes out of our oil production is 50 cents per head. 50 cents per head per day. It does not even go near the $1 per head per day that will remove abject poverty. So what we are saying is that there is need to be sea movement of resources to be able to tackle the problem. We have the ability, by and large, and we are asking for the heart. Bruno, thank you for the heart. President Clinton, thank you for the heart. Bill, thank you for the heart. We need more hearts like that in government, in the private sector, in the civil society.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have just a few minutes left for question and answers. Yes, sir, over there. If you would just say who you are and address your question, please.
My name is Wartenberg Potter, and I'm Bishop of a German Lutheran church. I have been following the discussion, and yesterday the proposal of President Chirac. I wonder why the plenary is so hesitant on this taxation question, because it won't hurt anybody, because the big finances are not poor, and it will create a lot of resources for the poor. So I want to ask that. And I also want to say the debt release question was related to a biblical understanding of the rich restoring the community well-being by releasing the debts which strive for people's life. And I would want to, the panel to seriously discuss again whether this taxation is not a real manageable and easy way to come to the resources.
Who wants to answer that one again? President Clinton, perhaps?
Look, I'm not against it, but you have to decide. If you have, as far as I know, there's never been an international tax. Who would approve this? Would it still have to be approved by all the affected national governments? And my guess is that there would be some that would be, not all wealthy countries would be equally affected by it. I'm not against a dedicated revenue stream for anti-poverty efforts, meeting Millennium Development Goals. And, you know, but it almost seems to me inevitable that given the way laws are enacted, that it would have to be maybe a different revenue stream among the different rich countries. You know, it's a very interesting idea. The only thing I hate to see is for us to get diverted into debating that instead of keeping people alive. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, we have to be fast. Jeffrey Sachs? We've already tackled the issue, and as you know, there is a workshop on Africa. There will be other panels discussing such issues today and tomorrow as well. Jeffrey Sachs.
Thank you very much. Thanks to 5 people that have made a profound difference for the world. I wonder whether we might agree to make this a historic session by agreeing that with your leadership, we will reconvene in Davos in 2 years, guaranteeing that every African in a malarious region has received a bed net that will keep them alive. That will cost us $3 per year per person in the rich world. Would you take the leadership for that?
Bill?
I'll get my hat and pass it around. Absolutely, malaria is a very solvable problem. And more money for bed nets, absolutely. Prime Minister Blair announced a UK government initiative to give, I think it was $75 million to that today. You know, our foundation is giving lots of money to that. In malaria, we need bed nets, we need new medicines, and we need a vaccine. The long-term thing that takes care of this is a vaccine, and we had very good results on that in this year. Bed nets are a very cheap way to save lots of lives in the meantime while those things come along. And so, you know, bed nets, that's absolutely doable. I think the thing that sometimes gets lost is the urgency of these things. You know, how long would it take the most optimistic person in the room, how long before we'd have an international tax in place? 5 years, 10 years? You know, between now and then, millions and millions of lives are at stake. And there's a lot of things where if you save a life, that makes such a difference in terms of the economics of getting education going, getting the infrastructure to have the kind of optimism, the positive cycle that we've seen in many different countries. So, you know, sure, let's meet 2 years and look at bed nets, and you know, let's go through that whole Millennium Development Goal scorecard, because you know there's certainly a lot of red squares when we look at where we are on that.
Another question, George Soros.
I should like to press this issue of an international tax. Very specifically, you have a global fund for fighting infectious diseases. It's well designed, it got off the ground, but it's about to kind of pass out for lack of funding. So here is an international an enterprise. It ought to have international support, and a tax on airline tickets and eventually maybe on financial transactions would be a very good way of doing it. And I would like, you know, if we put it to the G8, that unless you find some other way of ensuring that that fund can grow to the level where it will in fact bring HIV/AIDS and the other infectious diseases under control. Unless they find some other way of doing it, then let's do it through an international tax.
Thank you, George.
No, but I think...
yes, President Becky.
George, I don't think anybody has said, in principle, no to an international tax. When the matter has been raised last year, we had said in our last meeting with the G8, let's look at this matter in detail and see where we go with it. And indeed, because there was comprehension of the idea that, indeed, this is one of the challenges that would have to face. Would you need, as Bill Clinton has just said, would it in the end require approval by all of these parliaments and governments around the world and so on? But let's indeed look at it. But the concern that was expressed, I think quite legitimately, is a concern that Bill Gates is raising, that while indeed we're looking at that, we should not then stop with regard to the provision of the resources that are required today, because we're busy considering and debating and whatever else the matter of this tax. So it's not a matter of, because you can't say yes now because you don't know what the implications are, therefore you are saying no to the generation of the necessary resources. Let's indeed look in detail very closely, very urgently, at the feasibility of all of this. But that ought not to say we are waiting until we resolve those questions before we generate the resources that are required today.
One very last question, I'm sorry, but you know the Davos Swiss. Yes, please.
Yes. Bill Pace with the World Federalists. I was disappointed not to hear the linkage to the September 2005 summit and how important it's going to be not only to address the emergency issues on the Millennium Declaration goals, but also the security and peace goals that are linked, and which I would hope that we could hear that there will be a like-minded group of southern governments, and especially African leaders such as yourselves, with northern governments to make sure that that summit succeeds. And then, secondly, in the longer term, would Africa benefit from greater political and economic integration along the lines of the European Union to be able to receive the trade and development more effectively?
President Becky, do you want to answer that?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I don't think anybody that we failed to mention the Millennium Summit +5 later this year because of it's not important. But the institutions, the points of entry, this is what I thought we were discussing. What are the things that need to be done in order that we address these Millennium Development Goals and therefore are able to say at that summit what is being done practically in that regard? And all of the things that we're talking about are relevant to that outcome. It's an important summit, and indeed it ought to say, given what has happened in the last 5 years, what is it that we need to do next? Maybe things that Jeffrey Sachs is saying would be very important in terms of seeing how we move forward. So I'm quite certain that there would be a concerted view that would be generated among the like-minded people, indeed, to put pressure on that summit to make sure that it produces the results that it needs to produce. So what was the second part of that question?
An AU kind of...
Well, this is a point that President Obasanjo addressed earlier with regard to the formation of the African Union and its purposes. And one of those purposes, indeed, is greater integration of the African continent. And the matter that I had mentioned earlier of the focus on the regional communities around the African continent, because that's your first stepping stone. 14 countries of Southern Africa that are together in the Southern African Development Community. What do they do in order to achieve this integration? Or ECOWAS in West Africa. Those are building blocks to address the matter of the larger issue of the integration of the African continent.
I think, unfortunately, the time has stopped to part, but if we all agree, we may leave the last word to Bono.
Thank you very much. Just on the security question, because, you know, it is very touching for all of us here to have President Obasanjo tell us that we have a heart for these matters, but sometimes it's more important to have a hard head. So there's just three things I want to talk about, just very quickly. One, we're talking about the Marshall Plan. Let's remember what the Marshall Plan came out of. After the United States liberated Europe, they attempted to rebuild it, not just out of the goodness of their heart, which it certainly was, but as a bulwark against Sovietism in dangerous times in Europe. What we're saying is a Marshall-type plan for Africa could be a bulwark against the extremism of our age. And I think that might make sense in a country that's 40% Muslim, that Africa is a chance for us to demonstrate that it's not the front line in the war against terror, but soon collapsed states like Afghanistan, we see what happens to them. That's the first point. The second point is for you as a business community, because it's after all what this Davos thing is about. I want you to think about brands. You know a lot about brands, and actually, believe it or not, rock stars know a little bit as well, us being our own brand. But brands, the brand USA, brand Europe, brand United Kingdom. If we are honest, the brands are in a bit of trouble. It is polling now that companies with America in the name are not doing well outside of the United States. This is a serious issue for you as commercially-minded people. So I want to say that if Brand USA is in trouble, if the neon is fizzing and cracking a bit and the storefront's got a bottle thrown through it, it's a problem for business. So I think we can rebrand ourselves. There's a chance to redescribe ourselves to people who don't really know who we are, what are our values in the West anymore. They're not sure of who we are. We have a chance, I told President Bush, Paint those AIDS drugs red, white, and blue if you have to. But they are the best advertisements for our ingenuity, our science, our capability. We need to redescribe ourselves to a world that is unsure of our values. And the last point, and I think it's poignant for the day that's in it. You know, we were talking about Africa dealing with its moment, and this is its moment, its hour of need for sure. And we were thinking back to the scourge of fascism. And we're thinking about how the heroism of people who came to the aid of Europe to deal with the fascists. And I am brought to think about a congressman that I know who works along with Bill Frist. And Bill Frist is doing the most extraordinary work on this with the Republican Party. No one doing more. But it's a Democrat as it happens. Tom Lantos, a Hungarian who was put on the trains to a Hungarian concentration camp. And he was talking to me about this, what it was like to deal with the Holocaust as a child. And he told me that the thing that haunts him later on in his life, the thing that haunts him more than anything, was as a child the looks on the faces of the people who stood by and watched them be loaded on the trains, the passers-by, just the people who stopped. They saw these families being put on trains, and they didn't ask where they were going. Well, I asked, and it was a very hard thing to do, to ask somebody who'd had that experience. I asked him, is there anything analogous here, Congressman Lantos? And he said, yes. He said, there is. He said, but here we know where the trains are going. We know that these people are going to die for lack of drugs we can get in any corner shop. We know that people are going to die because of a mosquito bite when they shouldn't. So he then wrote to me and said, I give you permission to use this analogy as a Jewish person that's been through this. And he asked me what I was going to do with it. And I said to him that whenever I spoke about this, I would say that we this time are going to lie in front of the trains. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The time has come, unfortunately, to part, and I want to thank you on everybody's behalf, I'm sure. President Obasanjo, President Mbeki, President Clinton, Bill Gates, and Bono for their contribution to this debate. Thank you very much indeed.